Well, look, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. We're here to again spend some time talking about some of the issues or some of the things that's on the horizon as it relates to absentee voting in Mississippi. This series is part of a number of series that we've been doing every Friday afternoon where we bring together experts from across the state of Mississippi in a joint session between Mississippi and NAACP and One Voice. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Dr. Corey Wiggins. I currently serve as Executive Director for the Mississippi NAACP. I'm really excited about our guests that we have with us today. What I'll do is introduce our guests, and then we'll jump right into the questions. And remember, if you have any questions, feel free to post those questions in our chat, and we'll get to them if possible. So with us today, we have Jarvis Dortch. I want to say Representative Jarvis Dortch. He has served for a number of years in our state legislature, but now is currently the executive director for the ACLU, which is a new position that he's taken. Jarvis is a native of Jackson, Mississippi. As I mentioned, he served he was elected to the Mississippi legislature in 2015. Has been a strong advocate for a number of the issues that we champion across the state of Mississippi. And Jarvis previously did a lot of work around Medicaid and pushing for Medicaid expansion, funding for public schools in Mississippi. And we're excited for his new leadership and his new role at the ACLU. With us today also, we have Ms. Timaka James Jones, who is from the great county, or one of the great counties, Humphreys County, Mississippi. I always hold Humphreys County dear to my heart. My family's from Wolf Lake, Mississippi, so I always reference Humphreys County. But Timaka was appointed as the first African American female justice court judge by the Humphreys County Board of Supervisors in 1999. She went on to become the first elected African American female justice court judge representing Humphreys County, and was later elected in 2003 as the first African American female circuit clerk in Humphreys County. What I will say about both of our guests today with us, they are both proud Jacksonians. They are alumni. They're that part of that Tiger clan. I myself is all tonight. So look, nothing but HBCU love and swag.
JSU Blue.
So I appreciate both of you all for joining us. So look, let's jump in. But before we jump in, what I'll do is I'll let each of you all maybe just for a few minutes talk a little bit about the work that you're currently doing and connect that work to what we're seeing and what's happening around voting and voting rights issues in Mississippi. And we'll start with Timaka.
Good evening, everybody. November 3rd is here. We're ready. Absentee voting is in full swing. The circuit clerk's office, we're now open this week until 7:00 p.m. for absentee voting as well as voter registration. So we want to make sure that we get as many people out participating in the election process as possible. We know that this year's election is extremely, extremely important, as all of them are, but we want to make sure that we have full participation in the elections process.
Yeah. Thank you. Jarvis?
Yeah, thank you again, Corey. Thank you for inviting me on, and this is a great outlet for people to learn more about the political process and things that are happening in Mississippi. At ACLU, much of what we're working on, whether it's immigration, police reform, expanding access to healthcare, a lot of this depends on this election. So this election is very important to us, and making sure that, one thing that we really want to focus on is making sure that people don't put their lives at risk or their health at risk just to vote. They should be able to exercise their right to vote, in a safe condition. And we're pushing heavily to have as many people as possible vote absentee, especially people over 65, and inform them of that process. So this is something that we think is very important for the state of Mississippi. The state makes it tough for people to vote, to exercise the right to vote, and they make it even tougher for absentee balloting. So this is a really important conversation.
Well, look, now again, I appreciate both of you all for joining us today. I actually want to jump into a little bit something that Timaka mentioned, but I want to get to what you were talking about, a little bit about what you were talking about, Jarvis. Absentee voting. So, if I'm not mistaken, ACLU and some other partners were involved in a lawsuit here in Mississippi regarding absentee voting. Could you speak to that lawsuit a little bit, what it's about, and give us an update on where that currently stands?
Yeah, so we partnered with the Mississippi Center for Justice and also ACLU National to take a look at Mississippi's absentee voting law. And while I was in the legislature, as you mentioned, I left in July. We did pass some changes to the absentee voting law that expanded access dealing with COVID. And that law was still kind of, it's very vague, and we wanted a better understanding of who could vote due to COVID. We wanted to make sure that people that had a pre-existing condition and a health risk, that they were allowed to vote absentee. So we started that process by suing in Hinds County with a number of plaintiffs, but people that had pre-existing conditions like lupus, asthma, severe heart conditions, individuals that normally would not be allowed to vote absentee, but because of the change in the state law, we believe that they should have that right. We got basically a split decision in Chancery Court, and it was appealed to the state Supreme Court, and there was confusion about the state Supreme Court decision. What the state Supreme Court ended up saying is that every pre-existing condition is not a disability that allows you to vote absentee. But the Chancery Court, and nobody was making that argument. Our argument is that there are several pre-existing conditions that rise to a physical disability that will allow you to vote absentee. We know that the conditions that some of our plaintiffs had, like lupus and asthma and diabetes, we know those qualify or should qualify. The thing is, it's up to every circuit clerk to kind of make that judgment because the law is so vague and we haven't had much guidance from the Secretary of State. So, our effort going forward is to educate as many people as possible to let them know if you have a serious health risk, a serious health condition that you think causes a risk to go vote in person on election day, check with your circuit clerk and apply to vote absentee, and the circuit clerk is going to have to make the determination on whether or not that health risk meets the standard.
Okay. Well, look, that's great. I think one side of it is, as you mentioned, you are currently involved in some legal battles around this issue. I would say the Mississippi NAACP signed on to a similar lawsuit that's being taken up or moved or filed in federal courts. But the other side of this, Timaka, is that while these legal battles are going on around this particular issue, absentee voting, you and other clerks across the state still have to execute or apply to ensure that people have access and are able to voting. I think you mentioned earlier about what you all are doing with extended hours. So, how is this playing out, and what is this looking like in Humphreys County for you and your work as the clerk there?
Well, several people have already begun to vote, and we're excited about that. Having making sure that we've done everything we can to let voters know that we are open and available for absentee voting. The thing is, when it comes to COVID and temporary or permanent disability, especially when we're talking about the temporary disability, what we do is we have to accept the sworn affidavit of the individual. So therefore, if it is that individual tells us that they have a pre-existing condition and that would be their reason for voting absentee, we must accept them at their word. That's the issue. We often say as clerks that we're not investigators of individuals' affidavit. We must accept them at their word, and if that's the case and it meets the qualifications, then absolutely we must give those individuals their absentee applications. so that they go forward in the absentee process.
Yeah. Look, thanks for pointing that out, Timaka. And actually, I want to come back to that right after this break. We're going to take a quick break so you can hear about some of the exciting work that's happening with One Voice in Mississippi NAACP. And I want to come back and pick up right there on that issue.
We've said their names.
We marched in the streets.
We've sparked a new movement.
And now we have more work to do.
This year, One Voice and the Mississippi NAACP have collaborated to create a space for all of us to work on our agenda, the Black Agenda.
This series of events include the Mississippi Black Leadership Summit and the Mississippi NAACP Virtual Convention and Policy Institute, along with a menu of great opportunities to share your thoughts and learn how you can plug in.
We need your solutions,
your ideas,
your voice.
We need you.
Secretary of Commerce announced October 5th as a target date for completion of the 2020 Census self-response and field data collection operations. This means that households have until October 5th to respond to the 2020 Census online at www.my2020census.gov, by phone at 844-33-2020, by mail or in person via a census taker. That's online at www.my2020census.gov, by phone at 844-33-2020, by mail or in person via a census taker. Mississippi's 2020 Census website warns that for every person not counted in the 2020 census, Mississippi could lose approximately $5,000 federal dollars every year for 10 years for services such as Medicaid, Medicare, Head Start, the National School Lunch Program, healthcare centers, and improvements to roads and bridges, for example. Census data also determines the number of seats Mississippi will have in Congress, provides a basis for redistricting, and instructs elected officials on how to govern and support local communities. Respond to the 2020 census now and spread the word. Time is running out, but there is still time to respond to the 2020 census.
Thanks everyone for staying with us and joining us this afternoon. Today we're spending some time talking to Jarvis Dortch and Timaka James Jones out of Humphreys County about absentee voting and all of the stuff that goes involved in it. And I want to pick up on somewhere Timaka left off, was talking about people voting by absentee and having to sign affidavit. Timaka, could you talk a little bit more about what is the experience, right? For someone who decides like, hey, I have this pre-existing condition, I have these things going on, I want to vote by absentee. What is that process like for somebody who's trying to figure out what do they need to do and where do they start?
Absolutely. As an individual comes in, it is essentially the same process as regular absentee voting. Of course, Mississippi requires that you bring in your photo ID. You just simply bring in your photo ID, and the clerk will, in fact, ask you your reason for voting absentee. Once the individual give their reason, the application is printed, individual signs, complete the ballot, and the ballot process is then notarized by the deputy clerk. And it is really simple. It's a simple process. And clerks should make it as simple and easy, for voters to come in, to make sure that they are greeted properly and with courtesy, and of course making sure that that the patience is in order during this process. We have had quite a few individuals to come out for this election already, and that's a wonderful thing. That is absolutely phenomenal to have individuals participating in this election. But it should be very simple, very simplistic. Again, just simply bring your ID and you don't even have to give an explanation. You give a simple reason for absentee voting, and that's about it.
Well, look, Timaka, I heard you talk about it as being simple in the process. If only all of our counties had a clerk like yourself that you like to have in Humphreys County. I know there are challenges that exist in other places, which actually why I want to bring Jarvis back in on this, right? So one of the things that's often come up, I think whether it was a lawsuit or some of the language about needing some type of information from your physician to be able to vote by absentee. Is there anything you can clear up with that, Jarvis? I know that was one of the issues that came up around this whole sort of changes in the law.
I wish I could make it clear, but honestly, it's one of those situations you almost need a lawyer with you personally to make that part of it work. The court and the Secretary of State said that it pretty much has to be an order from your personal physician, and it can't be a recommendation. It can't be just guidance. Hey, I think you should stay at home 10 or 14 days. It has to be an order. There is nothing that really states what that order is or what that looks like. So again, this is something that's probably going to fall on clerks to try to figure out. The other problem with it is just in the real world, most people that get COVID, I had COVID, I never got an order to stay at home from my personal doctor. It was just that was the guide that you knew that was the guidance from the State Department of Health. And that was our argument. And it was, I was in the legislature when we passed this, and I asked the question about this language on the House floor, and the person handling the bill said that our intent was that this was covered by the state health officer, that you didn't have to have your personal attorney. Personal physician write an order for every person. That the guidance from the state health officer as a physician that covered everybody in the state. That's what we thought we were voting on. That's what we were told we were voting on. That's how we were told to understand the language. But the court said that that's not how they read it. And the Secretary of State said that's not how they read it. So you're really in a tough spot where you have to have a direct letter that is telling you to quarantine at home for 10 to 14 days.
Well, a question that I want to pose to both of you all then is, given that we have citizens now who are going to vote, who are voting by absentee right now, what is it that we should be communicating to them, right? Jarvis, when you think about like some of these issues you bring up, ultimately at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people are voting and participating in democracy and a democratic process. What should we be communicating to communities? Timaka, what should we be communicating to voters? And either one of y'all can take this. I would love your response from both of y'all, actually.
Well, sure. One of the things that we've been sending out to our local newspaper, to our radio station, our local radio stations, and Facebook pages everywhere is just to make sure that each individual realize that if they're not comfortable about coming in, it is pretty still early on in the election timeline. So if you choose to vote via mail, that if you are voting and it is because of a disability, temporary, permanent disability, individuals only have to have their applications witnessed, that their ballots should only be witnessed. So individuals don't feel like they have to go and find a notary. We're making sure that we tell individuals, just please do contact us and we'll guide you through it so that you can be assured that your vote counts by signing across the flap, making sure that your application is witnessed. Those are the things that we've been trying to get out to our community, and also to vote down the ballot, the entire ballot. A lot of I know a lot of people are just kind of focused on the presidential election, which of course is forefront. But we've been trying to make sure that we explain to voters, please do turn your ballot over. The ballot is front and back. Vote all the way down your ballot, including your local elections. So even if you don't have a hotly contested local election, to vote your entire ballot through.
Yeah, and I think what you just said was very important, that there are three ballot initiatives, and there are two that really erase the bad parts of Jim Crow that we still deal with in our election process. One is the state flag. you can vote to change the state flag this year. That option will be there. There's also an option to change the state constitution where a statewide officer is required to win a majority of the House districts to get elected, which means a Black person or a Democrat would likely have to get about 55% of the vote to win statewide because of this electoral college-like system we have in Mississippi. But when it comes to absentee voting, one of the things that we're pressing upon people is if you have an illness or some type of health condition that you think will put you at risk to contract COVID, we're encouraging people to contact their local circuit clerk and talk through them about the process and explain to them your reasoning for wanting to vote absentee. And that's a decision that they're going to have to make, but we're encouraging them to actually take that step and going to their circuit clerk.
Well, look, I appreciate both of y'all's response to that. I want to pause with that, and I want to come back right after this break, and we're going to have a few more questions and wrap up. And remember, if you have questions, feel free to post your questions in the chat box, and we'll be able to respond or have somebody respond by chat. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Let's get fired up and ready to vote. Remember, absentee ballot applications will become available for Mississippi citizens on September 4th. The first day to vote absentee is September 21st, and the last date to vote absentee is October 31st.
While the presidential election is top of the mind for most of us, we must remember we have more at stake on the ballot in November. From the U.S. Senate and House of Representative elections to the new flag design, there are important decisions to be made up and down the ballot. For more information on voting and the duties of elected officials, visit onevoicems.org. We must vote like our lives depend on it, because they do.
Welcome back. We appreciate everybody who's continued to be with us this afternoon. Today, we have two very talented folks who are doing a lot of work across the state of Mississippi in their local communities around voting. Jarvis Dortch and Timaka James Jones, who's joining us today. And look, we just want to have a few more questions, and we're going to wrap up for today. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Timaka, we talked about, all of these sort of things that are going on right now around COVID. You talked a little bit about what you all are doing in your office. One of the questions I have is that as you think about the voting experience, right, the day of voting, given with COVID, what are some of the preparations that you're seeing, not only that you're making, or even some of your colleagues are making, to ensure that when people are go to vote, or those who are voting in person, they just do it and stay healthy and safety in that process?
Well, thankfully, the state of Mississippi will be providing PPE, which is most important during the elections process. Of course, the social distancing, making sure that individuals are, and when they can be, especially in the larger precincts and even with our smaller precincts, making sure that individuals are distant during the process, making sure that bailiffs, I know that we have funding, hopefully, that will be available for us to have additional poll workers for election day. I think that there has been additional bailiffs to kind of help guide and help people throughout the election day. Humphreys County is a little unique in that we've just recently, as late as August the 4th, we had a special election. So it was kind of like a dry run of the election coming up for November. And thankfully, with the flooring, we had the tapes on the floor showing voters where to stand and moving forward during election day. Like I said, having the additional bailiffs in the precincts to kind of be like Walmart greeters, showing people where to go. And of course, most importantly, hand sanitizers. We had people that were in the precincts making sure that they wiped down the voting equipment after each individual person came to the voting machines. So making sure that folk had hand sanitizer as they walked in the door, as they finished voting. Those are some of the measures that we definitely put in place for November. Like I said, no, August was a dry run,
Okay.
but it worked pretty well.
Well, let me ask you this, Tamika. One of the things that just popped in my mind is, we've heard things about the day of the election, making sure that folks have enough poll workers. We've heard and talked from other counties how a lot of the poll workers we have now are mature in age, and starting to get younger people involved to be poll workers. Are you seeing any of that in Humphreys County, or are you really hearing anything about that from other colleagues?
Actually, the good part about it is that people are galvanized and excited about the election process. I've actually never had so many people to want to volunteer and
Right.
participate in being a poll worker, and that's a wonderful thing. Oftentimes, we're having a hard time finding poll workers, and I have spoken with several of my colleagues, especially in the Delta, and wonderfully to say we've had so many people that wanted to come out and volunteer and actually, so now since we have funding for extra workers, they don't necessarily have to volunteer. They can actually be paid poll workers. So that's really good because everybody that we've been talking to, they're excited just to be participating in the voting process. Folks have been saying everywhere we go, they're talking about voting. I want to make sure that my voice is heard. What can I do? So thus far, we've been able to fulfill some of the positions of our seniors that have had to say that that they've not been able to to participate in the process. So, or to serve as poll workers. So we're actually having an abundance of poll workers, which is very good for us.
Look, I'm excited to hear that. The thing is, that's one way. So often nowadays, we have people asking this question about how do I get involved and how do I get engaged. For those folks who are watching this now, if you're trying to figure out how can you be engaged, call down to your clerk and volunteer at the polls. And as a matter of fact, you may find it may be a little money attached to it through the volunteerism. So no, I appreciate you pointing that out.
Oh, absolutely.
Jarvis, one of the last questions I wanted to ask you is in terms of next steps, right? So you had this lawsuit. I'm assuming the lawsuit is the lawsuit still making its way through the courts? Kind of what's the status of the lawsuit right now? And then ultimately, at the end of the day, how do we expect this to impact folks as they get ready to go vote in November?
Yeah, so our lawsuit is done after the state Supreme Court's ruling. Our next phase in it is just educating the public. We're going to spend the next 30 days going out into the community and doing as much in person as we can do in a safe way. As far as earned media, doing events like this, also doing some digital advertising on Facebook and other online resources. We're really going to just try to get that information out there to let people know how to vote absentee. As you all were saying, we think everyone is really engaged in this election. If the last 4 years hasn't got you wanting to go and vote, I don't think there's anything we can say to you these last 3 days to get you there. But we want to make sure you know the process if you want to take advantage of absentee, or if you want to know how these ballot initiatives work. We've got to be on that education front as well because as was stated before, this is going to be a long ballot, and these ballot initiatives are going to be at the end, and some people may not even know they're there until they get into the polls. And we want to, spend time trying to inform as many people as possible about what's actually on the ballot this year.
As we get closer and closer to November 3rd, as Jarvis mentioned, there are initiatives on those on the ballot, very important initiatives, and so we really need individuals to make sure that they've had an opportunity to preview the ballot front, back, that clerks instruct individuals when they get their ballots during the absentee process, that there is a front and back. Vote down the ballot, from president all the way down to your election commissioners, your local election commissioners. It's very important that everybody have an opportunity to, to examine the ballot, making sure that they get the person that they're wanting to cast their vote for. So we just want to make sure that everyone understands the process, front, back, all the way down. And of course, as Jarvis said, that this is not their last time participating. Each election is important. Each and every one is important.
Let's say you do have those folks who may be participating in the voting process for the first time, right? Because like you said, these are people who recently got engaged, people who are really paying attention to elections. What is the thing that you would share to that first time voter, or maybe it's somebody who hadn't voted in years and deciding like, hey, now's the time for me to vote again? What are the things that you would sort of share with them as they're getting ready to go? And I know we're not talking about who to vote for, but why is it important for them to go ahead on and take that step and make sure they show up in November to vote?
Probably what I would say to them is don't stop with this election. Don't think that just voting on November 3rd is going to change and fix everything. The problem is people taking off elections. You can't take off and take things for granted because progress isn't guaranteed. So, vote in 2020, vote in 2021, vote in 2022. Anytime the polls are open, you have an opportunity to vote and make change, and vote for people that are at least working towards changing policy to better you. If you take the time off, you really, put yourself in a position to put the country and your state in a position where things can go backwards. And we've seen that since 2016. Take this same energy in 2020 and take it to the next year as well. And don't become cynical about the process.
I thank both of you all for participating with us this afternoon. I know it probably was a long day because of the work that you all do is so vitally important in your communities and to the state of Mississippi. And so, look, again, I appreciate the work that you all are doing and look forward to having you all back to talk more about it. So, again, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. This joint session, Facebook Live sessions that we've been doing on Friday afternoons to be able to just share with communities and share with people about what's happening in Mississippi, providing great people to talk about good information to inform our community. So I just want to thank Deshaun B, the Executive Director for One Voice, for the work in her leadership, and the State President for the NAACP, Reverend Robert James, for his leadership as well. So again, we'll see y'all on another Friday, and everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, go vote.
There you go.